Okay, I'm Sam, and this is the Illegitimate Scholar Podcast, the weekly cultural anthropology and history podcast that makes sense of our senseless world through indigenous and historical examples, academic methods in social science, and a perspective not limited by the crushing restrictions that come with traditional academia and public schools. I'm going to Freedom Fest this week, so I'll be gone. Hopefully it won't affect the live show, which is Thursday night at 8 p.m., as long as I have good enough internet and there isn't some crazy opportunity for me where Tulsi Gabbard wants to make me her personal aide, in which case, screw the live show. I'm not doing it anymore because I'm going to go do that full time. But I will likely be good on Thursday night, kept that schedule open to do that live show at 8 p.m. Eastern time, if you'd like. And that'll be on the podcast feed the next day, hopefully, as long as I have time to edit it. And then after that, next Monday should be the first of the Anthropology of Religion episodes. So please look out for that. I'm going to be doing a series on that, probably 3 or 4 episodes of how religion is viewed by anthropology from a cultural perspective. And I'm really excited for that. I think it's going to be really useful to have multiple weeks on the same topic, which is something I've been wanting to do for a while. And I think I've actually only done once, and that was a 2-part. Join the Discord if you have any feedback, anything at all to say, and I'll be there. So let's get into this. So there's a very strange situation, or at least I thought it was very strange, where I have, I don't want to get into personal stuff too much. I don't want to, but it's a jumping off point for a larger discussion. So I had this situation where some people who I don't really know very well, I was acquainted with one of them a while ago, reached out to some people that I also barely know, but my girlfriend knows, with cropped screenshots of a 3-year-old Facebook argument, which seems ridiculous because it is. It's absolutely nonsense. So I argued with somebody 3 years ago on Facebook, and granted, I was being somewhat of an asshole, as I am known to be, a squirrely little. But I was being a dick, but I don't think I was being a dick to the point of too much of being a dick. And this was a situation where this guy had gone out of his way on a Facebook buy or sell page where my friend was selling something, and he was saying a bunch of really, really rude things to him, grifter, con man, whatever. It doesn't matter. But this situation was one where I responded by just shit talking him back, which is not something that I'm proud of doing, but it's not something that I condemn as evil or wrong. But based on some cropped screenshots, and the other thing is that I had challenged this guy to a fight, essentially. I mean, I was challenging him with I was telling him, hey, nut up or shut up, where's the Addy? I was sending him SpongeBob gifs. I was sending him SpongeBob gifs where Patrick is jumping back and forth with his hands up like fisticuffs. And if you take that as a serious threat, especially when even in the text I was saying hey, I'm not going to just attack you. I literally say that. I'm not going to do that. But you have said something disrespectful to my friend, very disrespectful, and I would like you to agree to a fight. And I mentioned a boxing ring. And especially in a world where Logan Paul, one of the richest, most famous guys in their 20s, fights KSI, one of the other richest, self-made, they're both of them being essentially self-made, in their 20s, in the world, they fight each other. The richest man in the world has challenged one of the other richest men in the world to a jiu-jitsu match. Where do we get to the point where... So I stood kind of behind what I said. I mean, like I said, I wasn't proud of it, but this was a few years ago. But the people that knew my girlfriend drew conclusions that I was, abusive because of this. Because of, trying to... I didn't know why. I didn't get it. I didn't think it made sense to me. And, I asked him to fight. We used to duel in this country. I don't think that was a good idea. 200 years ago, someone insulted you, you would duel them, possibly slap them with your glove, and then you would shoot and possibly kill each other. I mean, it's crazy. That's crazy. But asking somebody to have a fight because they've said something very disrespectful, I just... Is that really so foreign that it's not okay? And it's not something I would do now. It was a few years ago. It was a different point in my life, and that's not the type of person I aspire to be. And again, I'm legitimately not proud of it. I'm not proud of it. It's embarrassing to even tell it here. But it's, it's not the end of the world. So these were my friends' friends, and they were concerned about my friend being friends with me or being around me at all because of this. And they were calling me abusive, apparently, and like that they were in danger and that I was controlling or something. And like, I just wanted to talk to them. I thought that a conversation would clear this up. And that's not something they were interested in, evidently. Since they wouldn't talk to me, and I was trying to get this through my other friend of like what their problem was, because like I saw the messages, they're not great, but I didn't think they were that bad. And I was like, look, like something that happened 3 years ago, like we can talk through this, and you have a bad image of me, and I thought the best way to handle something is just to communicate with words. But it didn't work out that way, which is fine. But my politics were mentioned. And since I can only assume what they think, I think that the way I look is part of it as well. And maybe not. I don't know. I would like to know. I was trying to find out. But my politics was mentioned, and that's why this, like, the context of this is important, because like this guy was telling my friend that he was a con man and a grifter and all these things that I thought were really disrespectful when he was trying to sell things on Facebook during the pandemic. And he had stopped being paid because of the pandemic, and he had bought Xboxes. This was when they were like selling for way above market. So like, look, it's not the best thing to do, right? It's not the best thing to do, but people have a moral issue with people who are buying and then selling at a profit these other things. It serves a purpose in our society. It's not great, and I think a lot of people have problems for that. But the extra layer of this was that this guy was from a very, very rich suburb of Connecticut, which is itself a very rich state. And my friend was like, literally, like, I knew this guy very, very well, and my friend was literally like trying to pay his insurance bill. And in general, at my university that I went to, and from this suburb that he was from, are people that generally don't have to worry about things like that. So there's an extra layer in this. And the reason I bring up my politics is because I don't think these people really understood that I was coming from a left-wing perspective in that situation. So we don't talk about my economic beliefs a lot on this, but I tend to have a lot of economically left-wing beliefs. And I'm not a communist. I'm definitely not a communist. But I believe in a lot of economic left-wing ideas when coupled with the right-wing cultural ideas. I think that the left wing has a lot of ideas with compassion and taking care of people, and I believe that that's part of how you can create a strong society, coupled with conservative beliefs in culture and society. I think that those things should work together to create prosperity for the people. So like when somebody who I'm perceiving to be a rich kid is like calling my friend who's not a rich kid these things, it really, really bothered me. But this guy's a Democrat, right? And just based on the way I look and the way I talk a lot of the times, I mean, people have always perceived me to be conservative, and I haven't always been as socially conservative as I am now. Like, I used to be in the Green Party, and I still had some socially conservative beliefs, but like, I'm not a general Republican. I voted probably for as many Democrats as I have Republicans. And it depends on the state and the situation, but like and more recently I have voted more Republican, but like this, so this guy is like, I mean, I know he's a Democrat, and I know he believes in these like left-wing ideas. And of course he believes in like the racism rhetoric. And I am somebody who believes in racism. I just don't think it's the whole thing. I think class is very important. I think there's a lot of evidence that class as something that's important to individuals has kind of been subdued in our society. And I've talked about that in other episodes. So this is nothing new. But the perspective I was taking here was a Marxist one, and I'm being perceived as this far right, violent, like guy. I think, I'm assuming this, but like, I don't know. From what people have told me, like from me asking questions, because they won't even directly talk to me. I mean, it's weird. But This guy is a Democrat, buys into the racism rhetoric as like the full thing. And these people, in my personal experience, been my personal experience, that they don't care about poor white people. And I think that that comes from a place of like, they view all white people as the same. They view white privilege as the ultimate thing. And they, while generally, in my experience, these people are from the upper class and the upper middle class, they tend to view other white people not as being a different socioeconomic class from them, but because they discount class entirely, mostly they discount class, they can then view poor white people as a product of some sort of failure, as the upper class for most of human history, and especially in the Anglo world the last few hundred years, has viewed poor people in general, but in this case, poor white people. They can view them as some sort of moral failure on their own part, since they don't have one of these other things. They're not black or indigenous or any of these other things. They're white, and that means that they had the same advantages as them, even though that's not true. Class is very, very important in the United States and always has been. Is actually more important now than ever. So that's the way I'm seeing this, and I'm assuming, and I'm basing it on these other things, and I'm basing it on other interactions, but like that's all I can do. And it just reminds me of a way that I felt treated in Connecticut for most of my life, as being treated as less than based on certain mannerisms that I have, certain ways that I act, and this is something I'm sensitive to. It's contempt from the upper class. Connecticut is not only one of the richest states, it's also one of the most segregated states by both income and race. It's segregated within towns and between towns. We have a lot of there's towns in Connecticut with a household income of over 140,000, and there's some under 20. The town I grew up in had 2 trailer parks, and it had $1 million homes. Like that is what Connecticut is. And a lot of places are like that, but trust me, it's quantifiable. I don't have the numbers ready, but I know that it is this way. And it's a very class-based place, because New England, more so than other parts of the country, was settled, and the culture was created directly from English Puritans. And these were people who had a very class-based society. And in England, it's still like that today. And it's like that in Old England, it's still like that today. But it's also like that in New England still. And people will deny it, but it's usually because it benefits them to discuss issues of race over issues of class. Because if you're a upper class white, it helps you out a lot if all you can say is, oh yeah, I'm white privileged, I have white privilege, and you really point towards white privilege, because then it discounts all the income and class privilege that you have. So then you're just another white, and you can atone for being a white person by, virtue signaling and donating money and putting signs in your yard and things like that. And you can still be rich and upper class and the richest 5% of the country. And then you can look down on poor white people and their mannerisms and everything. I would bet a kidney that this guy would not talk to a black person the way he talked to my friend, but my friend was white. And, these same types of people are the ones that say diversity is our strength, which I agree with, actually. But they only count diversity that's like skin deep. And this is something that hurts black people as well. And it hurts other races. It hurts everybody, because in my perception, I think this is a correct perception, what generally happens is that the standards of these people, and I'm talking about, upper class, white, coastal elites, I'm talking about colleges, elite colleges, their standards are, they want you to fit the right box, but they want you to think the same way as anyone else. So they're not accepting like real diversity, even from black people, even from indigenous people. They're not accepting real diversity. They would accept people that are, in their language, enacting whiteness. And you guys are probably rolling your eyes right now at the term enacting whiteness, but I actually think there's a lot to be said there, because when you say enacting whiteness, what you're saying, and let me break this down, you're enacting whiteness. So you are taking into the real world, you are acting and taking actions that are white, even though you are not white. And this really points to something that has been going on for a while. And that is that white supremacy, as it is known and as it has been known, is gone in any sort of serious way. Like there are not people like there were in the 1920s who, based entirely on the color of your skin, are not going to like you. There are those people, but they don't have any real power. But what you see is that the left, the cultural left, points to examples of black people and to Native Americans, to Hispanic people, to all these people, Enrique Tarrio, anybody that is not white but has these ideas that are associated with the traditional West, and they are calling them far right, and they are saying that they are the black faces of white supremacy. And this isn't made up. You can go to CNN, I think, and you can see articles like this. It's not uncommon. And what that points to is that old form of genetic racism is out of power. But what we have is a situation where the people who would have in another time likely really been white supremacists, and in this stretched definition of white supremacy, they are white supremacists, I guess, by that definition. But if white supremacy is now racially inclusive, it's something different, isn't it? I mean, you can still call it white supremacy, but it's actually talking about something that's deeper than race. It seems like it's talking more about culture. It's talking about the way that people think. And this is a way that even non-white people can think and act. And now they're allowed to do that by the people on that side who would have been against them 100 years ago, probably. So what I'm saying is that it's been established by these people that it's not really about race. It's been established that even white supremacy isn't about race. It's really about traditional culture, I think. I mean, that's the way that I have to see it when I break it down like that. So there's probably other ways to view this. Of course there is. But that's what it looks like to me. So these beliefs, they stem from the same source. So what is being called white supremacy by like Harvard, by elite colleges, by Democratic politicians, what is being called white supremacy is now something that can be any race. It's a manifestation of this older cultural idea that has opened itself up to other races as long as they have similar-minded ideas. And because those similar-minded ideas are more common in this class of people, these traditional right-wing white people, the left-wing white, which views itself as the saviors of the black people, the saviors of the minorities, they view that as an extension of white supremacy. But at the same time, they are also an extension of white culture. Like, if you're at Harvard, I mean, your root is in Western culture, in white culture. So this is a progressive manifestation of white culture, but it could still be called white supremacy. And I think that it's very naive for people to believe, when their institutions are the ones that used to say all these things that they view as completely horrible, all these buildings at these colleges that a lot of these people think should come down, well, they went up at a certain point because this institution had those beliefs. And like, in my view of culture and everything, those beliefs don't just go away. They just manifest in different ways. And they might manifest in progressive ideas, but in a lot of history, these progressive ideas have meant a lot of different things than they mean today. And a lot of the times we look back at progressive ideas today, like eugenics, and we view them pretty negatively, and I think for good reason. So what I see is a lot of these liberal white people at elite colleges in New England, the Northeast, both coasts, they view their perspective as the right one, and they view like their perspective on the world and their set of values as broadly being from white culture, because they don't differentiate between white people. And what that means for white people who aren't from upper class white culture, they have to, like me, they have to compromise their values to signal their virtue in situations where they're trying to be accepted in the mainstream. So black people in general deal with this worse than anyone, I think, because they're expected to act a certain way that is outside their culture generally. But what happens at elite colleges is they'll fill the box with like somebody skin deep. And that's why Africans, not African Americans who are descended from freed slaves, but Africans and Caribbean black people are heavily overrepresented at elite colleges. Because even though neoliberals will pay lip service to the idea that black people are different culturally, they won't actually do that much to allow people that they would view as being beneath them into their elite institutions. And they do the same with poor white people. And honestly, it's less of a big deal for white people. Like, I'm not saying that what I'm dealing with is anywhere near as bad, but it's like I had a certain upbringing, and I'm not saying I had a terrible upbringing, but I have different values and I have different mannerisms and I have different ways of dealing with things because of my upbringing and because I was in the Marine Corps, and different things are valued. You have to do certain things. You have to act a certain way in different situations. Like, that's why the transition out of the military is so hard, because you're used to dealing with situations in a certain way. And, violence and anger were normal in the Marine Corps and in other places. And they're not normal in other places in life. And I'm not saying that they're a good thing. But what I'm saying is that there's not a lot of understanding given to differences in people's lives based on culture. There's just this idea that we need to have diversity, but it's just skin deep, and you want to get everybody in there thinking the same thing, and you want to avoid as much diversity as thought as you possibly can, because what it's really about is retaining authority in the upper classes. And they've done a very good job of convincing people that it's not that it's a progressive idea that's really good for people who are oppressed, and that poor white people aren't oppressed, they're just bad. So, in the past, the way that I've been has served me very well, and it's been something that I have to fight down as I've transitioned into a civilian life. And I think I've done an okay job at that in a lot of ways. But these situations where I feel like I've been typecasted by somebody based on like superficial things about me, like the way that I look, my perceived politics, having a beard and looking angry and being a white guy that isn't fat. Like I can only assume why they think I was violent when I never threatened anybody at all. Like, I really, really didn't. And I was making kind of jokes and I was talking general shit. It wasn't like that big of a deal years ago and drawing massive things. But the way I'm perceiving it is that I'm being seen like as the way I look and what I do and my beliefs or whatever, that I'm outside of the acceptable social class for this person who they know, and I have to be kept away. And they can justify that by saying that I'm abusive or anything, but like, it's a real stretch. It's a real stretch. And I it's probably something completely different, and I've missed something, but I don't know, because I try to talk to them. And it feels like it's because of the way that I look and like mannerisms and things. And I was accused of being abusive for this. Yeah, so I can only guess. So like, and there are other situations I've had stuff like this. There's this thing that people talk about of being arrested for just standing while being black or something. But like, or getting the cops called on you. It happened at a Starbucks and everyone was protesting. I mean, when I was in college, I did not look like I fit in college. I had the cops called on me in my own office. I was like doing data entry work in my office, and somebody called the cops on me. And so the cop comes and like, he knows that like, hey, someone just said you were down here and looked suspicious essentially, but like, it didn't mean that he didn't take my ID. It didn't mean he didn't have a gun, and that could have ended with me being shot. And like I'm saying, like a certain number of police interactions and there's plenty of factors, but it's like, black people get killed by the cops more than white people, but white people get killed by the cops. And it differs by race. It differs by race, but it also differs by income. Poor white people are more likely to get killed by the cops than richer white people. And poor black people are more likely to get killed by the cops than richer black people. But like, that doesn't feel good when you're in a place and like, and I'm not saying that like I'm comparing my experience to the experience of black people in America. It's not as bad as that, of course. And I'm making that clear not because I'm like groveling to the woke mob. I'm making that clear because a lot of people they hear things like this and they would misunderstand it based on like the way they think. So I want to be very, very clear that I absolutely believe that racism is real. And I'm not doing that because I'm like tunneling to the woke mob. I truly believe that racism is real. I think that class is real as well. And I think that class is actually bigger of a deal. But in this particular case, this thing of like getting the cops called on you and being worried about being killed, that's definitely worse for a black guy. Although it's real for me too. And I was scared and I am scared and I avoid interacting with police. I don't hate police. I know that certain of those interactions end badly and I just don't want to have any part of it. I mean, even if they show up to your house, they can still like shoot your dog. Like, who wants that? I read an article, they crushed a pet moth for some reason. Yeah, whatever. So black people get this a lot of like, or they used to get this much more, I'm sure, but like just having the cops called on them because they look suspicious, because they look like they don't fit in. And I haven't felt like I fit in this world. I felt like I was treated differently for a lot of reasons. But like, I understand I look the certain way, and I don't talk about a lot that I do, like just listing off what I do, but like I volunteer. I'm explicitly nonviolent. If you've listened to the podcast, you should know that I'm explicitly nonviolent. I feel like I have pretty reasonable beliefs. People always tell me they think I'm a conspiracy theorist, and then I ask them, what conspiracy theories do I believe in? And nobody has ever given me a real answer. Well, some of them have given me some decent answers, but those answers are like, yeah, I don't fully believe that. I just think it's a possibility. I'm involved in the anti-war movement a little bit. I help my friends. I help my family. My only hobbies are gardening and video games. I barely do anything. I smoke a little weed, which is legal where I live, and I drink sometimes. Like I don't understand what about me besides being a tall white guy with a beard that looks kind of angry sometimes. It gives off an abusive vibe. I don't get it. But to be accepted, it doesn't matter what I do. To be accepted in like the upper class world, to be accepted in like neoliberal Connecticut society, you have to change your values. It doesn't matter what deeds you've done if you give off the perception of somebody who is not in line with these moral imperatives of human rights and reproductive rights. It's all about rights, and it's all about labels of you're a Nazi and you're a fascist. And I was called a fascist this morning for believing in school choice. I was called a fascist somehow. And that's what it's about. It's not about what you do. It's about being perceived on the same team. And look, the Republicans do this too. I'm not on the receiving end of that. So to be accepted, instead of like actually doing good deeds, I would have to change my mannerisms and my values, and I would have to do things to make myself appear less masculine and aggressive, essentially. I mean, that really feels like what it is. And I would have to suppress my cultural identity. And that's something that, since they don't view what I'm talking about as a legitimate culture, you'll find examples of people saying white people have no culture, which is nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. And to be honest, it's dehumanizing. And I don't want to do that. I would have to adopt this doctrine, drop class consciousness, all these things. And it used to be a thing that people understood the differences between different people in different parts of the country and different parts of the state, different upbringings. They understood the differences in people. It feels like, I think, it's my perception, that people understood the differences in people more than they do today. And that is an idea that is, I think, needed for republicanism, for having a republic, a federal republic like we have. And people will insist we're a democracy, but if you read any of the founding documents, they only mention a republic. They don't mention democracy. We're supposed to be a republic. And that's why during the Civil War, it was the battle cry of the republic, not the battle cry or battle hymn of the democracy. It's a battle hymn of the republic. But after the Civil War, it came this idea, it's not Lincoln's fault, but the result of this is that the country was thought of much more as a single thing. And it was thought of, the power of the federal government was thought of as being much more powerful. And with a federal government that is considered more powerful and considered able to enact much more restrictive rules comes with it the idea that morality should be legislated. And that comes from both sides because it's in the idea of the country now, not just the idea of certain people. I hope I'm not losing anybody. I think I'm all over the place, but I'm going to try to edit this down. So please give me some feedback on this. So, I mean, this was why when the American Revolution happened, why they decided to let the South keep slavery. So after the American Revolution, the Northeast, they stopped slavery, and the South kept slavery. And you can view that as a negative thing. And you know, slavery is obviously a moral bad. And you look at the situation where the Northeast, they free their slaves after the American Revolution, and the South keeps them. But the alternative was the country splitting up entirely and them not agreeing on anything. So in that case, yes, it did allow for slavery to continue in the South, like the people in the North, but they wouldn't have been able to stop it anyway. And there would have probably been a lot more death and a lot more other things. So them allowing slavery to continue in the country eventually then leads to that having to be dealt with after the Northeast for many years had gotten any slavery dispelled. And once you don't have slavery, slavery looks way worse than it did when slavery was the norm. So the example of them allowing slavery is such a strong example because it's such a terrible thing that they were allowed to continue to happen under the rule of this federal government because they viewed the states as that separate from one another. And that comes rooted in an understanding that the culture was different in different states, and that's still true today, and in different regions as well. So I don't, you know, slavery is obviously bad, but the things that were going on in other parts of the country and what the United States did even after they ended slavery, even in the South, like those are very bad things as well. Like the stuff in Guatemala and like, you know, toppling governments across the world in the early 1900s, late 1800s. I don't know if you can say that slavery is worse than completely destabilizing a country and putting the native people into like serfdom. Serfdom is not that much different than slavery, and effectively they had like corporate held like hellscapes, dystopian hellscapes. That seems like close to slavery to me. And it doesn't seem like a moral better than slavery. And this is happening like 30 years after slavery is ended in the United States. And I'm not telling you that to say like, oh, slavery wasn't that bad. No, it's that slavery was very bad. And there were a lot of other things that were very bad. So I don't want to get into like a hierarchy of evil, hierarchy of atrocities here. But the point is that even allowing slavery to exist in the same country comes from the cultural idea that these states shouldn't be imposing their ideas on other people. And that comes from a cultural understanding that you shouldn't be imposing your values on other people at all, although they were in certain places. And when you get far enough away from that, you get to the point where you're really not having any sort of cultural relativity. And cultural relativity is supposed to be, and that means like viewing other cultures. It's a very important term in anthropology. It means that you're viewing the cultures of others as inferior to your own. And it makes sense when you view white people as all the same to not understand that cultural relativity does apply in that case. But it really does. And that idea leads you to think that your own culture is superior to others. And it leads you to call people fascists. And it leads to a situation where people can't exist in a country together because they're not willing to allow other people the courtesy of believing that their intent is positive and that they just have different value systems than you. And once that happens, I think you're in a lot of trouble. And I think that our country is in a lot of trouble for that very reason. And that's something that needs to be reversed. And that's kind of where we're at. So we're in a situation where I feel like I have personally been viewed as like just a stereotype, less than human, like not capable of being a moral actor because of some other, or a good moral actor because of other beliefs that I hold, I suppose, and values and the way that I talk. And people would certainly view this as like, some people are going to roll their eyes and just say like, oh, well, you were being a dick. And like, yeah, I was being a dick in the values of your culture. The values of my culture, what I was doing was fine. I challenged somebody to a fight who was being a dick to my friend. That's a positive thing. If you're in the Marine Corps, that's a good thing to do. People would commend you on that. Not here, though. So, I'm being viewed as one-dimensional. And I've often, when a white person expresses things like this, it's told as being an example of like white fragility, like literal white fragility. And they're like calling, oh, you're so sensitive. It's like, am I allowed to be sensitive? I'm sensitive. I am sensitive. It's not a secret. It's not a secret. One of my close friends, she was talking to me about, she said to me, like, she prefaced it with like 3 sentences. She was like, look, like, I don't get upset at this, but like, I don't mean anything by it. I just like, whatever. And she goes, Sam, you can be a little dramatic. And my immediate response is like, oh, really? I can be dramatic. Why don't you call the newspapers? No one knew that. No one ever believed that I was dramatic. Obviously, I'm dramatic. Everybody knows I'm dramatic. I knew I was dramatic. It's fine. I'm being dramatic right now. Not on purpose. This was my natural response because I'm dramatic, right? But like, yeah, I'm dramatic and I'm sensitive, whatever, maybe white fragility. I just don't want to be around people who don't respect my feelings and my values. And that's the root of what you need for understanding. If you don't have the simple respect for other people, if people don't have the respect for you to view your feelings as legitimate, you can't communicate with them at all. And we're at a point where the country can't communicate with each other, even people that live in the same town as you. And this is how a republic dies, is thinking that you need to enforce your beliefs and not giving someone the benefit of the doubt that they are a good moral actor and their beliefs are, and their intention is good, or their intention can be good, or at least you'll hear them out and understand their differences. So no one should ever listen to the advice or even be around, in my opinion, people who don't believe their concerns are valid, whatever they are. It's a sign that somebody is likely to have no sympathy for you in a lot of different situations, because they're going to downcast anything that you feel. And why should anyone be around somebody like that feels that way about them? Anybody. And it doesn't lead to a healthy country. It doesn't lead to a healthy country at all.